So, Bern, following on this theme of like Trump and what's behind the headlines, Grant Shapps has been in the headlines this week for allegedly getting angry at sort of the woke agenda around the MOD about, trying to achieve targets rather than focus on operational effectiveness. And also, the Royal Navy has apparently been focused on looking at the sort of green agenda as well. But you and I have had a bit of conversation about this. You've got some views about it. What's your take?
So this is DEI, yeah, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. I, from a personal point of view, I'm not. There's two things for me. One is I'm not happy with the DEI agenda. I don't think it's diverse. I think it bases its objectives on equal outcomes, not equal opportunities, which I think is wrong. And when it talks about inclusion, it depends who's speaking, but sometimes it means everybody's inclusive apart from us. We can be exclusive. So I think it's a muddled idea, and I'm not happy that large institutions have adopted it with that much thought. If it means that you set agendas to recruit certain types of people ahead of others, then I'm worried that it's not based on merit. Now, if a company wants to do it, fine, as long as they stay within law. But if the military want to do it, I'm a little concerned about then the ultimate ability to fight our enemies.
Yeah, and this is a good example of getting behind the headlines, isn't it? So the Grant Shapps point was that it was alleged that the British Army were looking at reducing the security vetting requirements for overseas personnel to join the military because that was stopping a lot of them joining. And it wasn't that long ago that the Royal Air Force was being pilloried for overlooking male, pale, and stale candidates to try and get more diversity and try and meet targets, as if the targets was the main focus, and therefore you'd be prepared to compromise operational capability on the altar of meeting diversity targets. The problem is, I have a slightly different take on all of this. So, for example, I was an instructor on the Jet Provost many, many years ago, and we didn't have female pilots at the time. And it was decreed that we should be having female pilots, but there were no role models. There were no female pilots within the service, so people didn't see themselves in the service, therefore nobody was applying. So the first tranche of females that we got in, there was a lot of effort put in to make sure that some made it through to the front line. And that created a lot of friction at the time because it was felt that maybe some of the other candidates were being overlooked in favour of females. But what happened once that period was over and we had some female role models, later in my career I was a squadron commander and then a force commander of the whole Harrier Force. And I was very proud to have female pilots who were just as good, if not better, than their male counterparts. And now we had role models within the service that people could aspire to. They could see themselves in the service, and therefore we were attracting people. So our service benefited from having diversity, and I think part of the challenge is that the service should represent the population it protects. And if there are large segments of that society which are not represented in the service, how do we create role models? How do we get them in? And it's not, from my perspective, absolutely shouldn't be done just to meet targets. But if it makes us better because we're harnessing skills and experience that we wouldn't otherwise have, then I think it's a good thing. And to take it out of the military domain, it wasn't that long ago that the Labour Party, remember they had female-only lists for MPs back in the 1990s because they said we've just not got enough females MPs. So, and it was challenged in court, but eventually they did continue it because the argument was they're underrepresented. Now I think they've got 51% of their MPs or more are female, and there was a suggestion they were going to look at all female lists again, and that was stopped in court because they went, hang on a minute, that is not reasonable, that's not fair, because actually you're not underrepresented, you are equally represented, therefore you can't have female lists. So I do think it's a challenge, not only for the military, it's a challenge for industry as well. You've worked in industry, it helps sometimes to have different perspectives, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if it happened in my company, I'd stop it. That sort of approach, I'd stop. In my software business, we have probably the widest diversity for a small company of any company in the world. But, we've recruited people on merit. We haven't said we want this number. And it's worked. And my view is, if there is an issue, the causes of that issue should be addressed. The fundamentals. I think it's a bit lazy just to exclude people on the basis that you'll get more of the other side. And I won't name the company, but a very large multinational the other day, the boss said, if we're thinking of recruiting any white men, then I want to interview them first. I think it's lazy. And actually doesn't work.
No, I agree, but I guess our point is this is not just a problem for the military. I've got a very good friend who works in the city, one of the big 4 firms. They are concerned the number of females on their boards, and therefore they are a number of female partners.
Too many or too less?
Too few.
Yeah.
So they are promoting some of the females above their males in order to address that balance, and that's causing all sorts of friction.
Yeah.
And it's not suggesting for any minute that any are work. It should be absolutely done on merit. It's not in order to try to achieve those targets. And they said that one of the challenges is that you'll meet the targets. The danger is that the business isn't there to achieve targets; it's there to make money.
Yeah. And that applies to the military as well. The blood and treasure in the military, that's got to be the goal. I know this is turning into a long subject, but I'd spent the last 40 years in the tech industry, which up until quite recently was very much underrepresented by females, and the issue wasn't solved by setting quotas, which I completely disagree with. It was solved actually by dealing with the attitude of middle management men who deliberately, because they were prejudiced against women's ability in the tech world, it prejudiced them about promoting and developing. So women got dismissed from the process as opposed to being, positively selected. As that was dealt with, and the dinosaurs in the tech industry, which were pretty macho, disappeared, then women's contribution, flourished. And, I wouldn't want to draw an equivalence between men and women in the tech industry or any other gender, but, it worked out brilliantly, as it happens.
And that's why I think getting behind these stories is a bit more to it than this. Yeah. I always think it's very easy to say it's just ticking to get quotas. From my perspective, it's absolutely about getting the best military force you can. If that means we need to have a more diverse workforce, because in my experience, that will create benefits for the military, then we need to go very hard at it. And it's not just a challenge to the military, it's also one for society.
Yeah, right.